Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode, and I'm absolutely thrilled today to be visiting with Paul Remmers. Paul, first of all, welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
Sure, thank you.
Paul, you are now retired and recently published the book Island Intern, but I'm wondering if I could start off with by asking you, what was your professional background before you retired?
I was an internal medicine physician for 40 years, and I was at UTMB, the medical branch in Galveston, also at Baylor, primarily those two places as on the faculty of those two institutions.
So certainly Houston is well known nationally and internationally in the medical community, but from Texas perspective, I would say Galveston is equally well known. Could you tell us about sort of the medical scene in Galveston, both as teaching hospitals and then as treating locations?
The physicians in Texas, or especially the ones who schooled and trained in Texas, know about Galveston. It's the UTMB, the medical branch is the original medical school and has a long-standing tradition since 1891 of training physicians throughout the state, and so that was the primary spot for decades where physicians were trained here in Texas, and remains that, especially as a referral center, a very active medical community there in Galveston.
So what led to Island Intern? Is it the book you had in you based upon your 40 years of professional work? Is it something you just wanted to do, or perhaps something different?
As I retired, I thought about something different, but I had been working on this book for a long time, and as just a fun project, and my family encouraged me to keep going and to finish it. And I've always enjoyed reading and creative writing as well as a hobby, and so this kind of, I had some ideas about it as an intern and what I went through, and then living in Galveston. I'm from Galveston, born and raised, and so we all knew about the 1900 storm. Everybody there knows about it, and so I put the two together in the sense that thinking about what it was like perhaps going through the 1900 storm as an intern.
I love to talk to authors about their approach to writing. I've written numerous works of nonfiction, but I've never successfully completed a novel. So you have that on me. But the times I've tried to write a novel, it's literally, I feel like it plays out in my head and I'm almost just recording what I see. Is that your process, or is it something different?
It Over the years, I have done quite a bit of writing, just sort of journaling on my own, and gotten better at it. I think about putting my ideas on paper, and I've always enjoyed with certain authors, in particular, how they create characters. With writing a novel, I've learned that there's a lot to it as far as plot and character development and setting. This is a historical fiction novel, and I'm familiar with Galveston and its history, of course, but getting really into the history, and also to what I went through as an intern, some of the ups and downs, and also as a physician, just dealing with patients, and the how hard it can be, how challenging, and you're seeing people as they really are, with all the challenges they face in their health. And so a lot of it was too that the interactions that I've had over the years with patients and how those play out.
Paul, there's another book that's really in the national and maybe even international focus right now about Galveston called Melting Pot, excuse me. And it talks about Jewish immigration to Galveston. And I really wanted to use that to introduce the topic of, for probably from the late 1800s through 1950 or so, Galveston was really the melting pot of Texas because it was the key port. And almost all immigrants who came by ship disembarked at Galveston to that point. And what was it like kind of growing up in that melting pot when you had so many different people coming from outside the United States into Galveston, and really particularly after the 1900 hurricane and up till they closed international shipping during World War One, or the start of World War One, you had huge number of immigrants coming in to Texas through Galveston.
It's true. There was so many, and growing up in that area in Galveston was a great thing for me as far as diversity and learning of other peoples. You had neighbors who were Italians and Germans and Irish and Jewish and Hispanic, African American. It was just a real melting pot. And I grew up with that, and it really opened my eyes to other cultures at a very young age. The Jewish culture, I have many Jewish friends that grew up with, went to school with, that we're still friends. And there is a lot of persons who immigrated and settled in Galveston, not just those who immigrated to the central part of the state, perhaps, or the Midwest, but a lot of them remained in Galveston. It was a thriving center in the city and very active culturally, very exciting place to grow up.
I have a friend who in his mid 60s decided to become a doctor. So I've had the chance to watch him go through the process literally this decade. But you write about him going through that process 125 years ago. What was the life like for an intern in the first couple of decades of the 20th century? Is before penicillin, and my perception is the practice of medicine was quite different, or am I wrong about that?
No, you're right. It was very different. There are very innovative things that happened after 1900, like antibiotics, like insulin, other treatments, that cancer treatments, chemotherapies. They were unheard of practically before 1900. That being in the hospital at that time was more like a death sentence. There really wasn't much you could do for a lot of patients. And reading about that, trying to explore that, I didn't find a lot about that. Physicians tend to be optimistic and try to portray what's going on in a positive light, but they faced a lot of serious illnesses. Infectious diseases were rampant, and I thought I had it hard back in the early 80s.
And the other thing is about interns, and many of us have had friends who became physicians, but the process that you all went through, certainly in the 1980s, I thought it was beyond grueling then, but my sense might be 80 years before that, it was perhaps even more grueling. Could you talk about that process and maybe what it was sort of like for you and how you incorporated that into your book?
It was pretty grueling, I thought, for myself as an intern in the 80s. But that's a long-standing tradition in medicine. It's all different now. As an intern, it's a very difficult year. You work 100-hour weeks, you have no days off, but it's so intensive, you actually learning by fire, you're tested, and the relationship you have with the faculty is close, but it's almost adversarial. You really are challenged, and you really have to sort of find your way to becoming a doctor. It's that transition point from medical school. When you finish, you really don't know what you know to where you're actually the one responsible for the patient. And that's that's a big transition. And so in the tradition, it's not that way now, but you worked a lot of hours and it was a very difficult year. I've had colleagues my age, we talk about that, how hard all that was.
As I said, I've seen the effect of that on people, but I've never been able to visit with someone about the emotional impact. What was it emotionally like for you, and how were you able to put that emotion into your character?
That was, thinking back about that, how emotional it was. You get very depressed at times and highs and lows. And so I wanted to convey that to the character as well. It's all fictionalized, of course, but it included some of the emotions I had felt. That it really is sort of a make or break year for you as a physician. And nothing is as intense as that is during your intern year as the other years combined. So I wanted to convey that. And it's a combination of lack of sleep and excessive stress and trying to assume the role as a physician caring for the patient. You're the one in charge. And so lots on your shoulders to get it right.
So I graduated from law school in May of 1983. And after taking the bar exam, the tradition I followed at that time was the grand tour of Europe. What that means for this podcast interview is I was in Scotland when Alicia hit. So I didn't get to experience Scotland because I was living in Houston at the time. What was Alicia like? And for those who may not know, Alicia was a hurricane that hit Texas coast, specifically Galveston and Houston in August of 1983. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how you were able to incorporate that literally into your book?
I graduated in May of 83 as well. And so internships usually start in July. And in August, we didn't know about the weather. And we were told that the hurricane was coming. We had to work the other interns and the nurses. And that was Hurricane Alicia. And we didn't know anything about it. We just went back to work. We were practically living at the hospital anyway. And then it hit that night. And the night that it hit, it knocked all the power out of the hospital. And then the accessory generators went out. And then so all night we took care of patients with no power, pitch black in the middle of the hurricane. And it was terrifying. But we had to keep people alive, and people on ventilators. And it was really something. Looking back, and I've talked to some of the other interns and some of the nurses we worked with, how we just, it was pitch black in the hospital and patients were terrified, and we were trying to keep everybody calm. We were ventilating patients by hand and trying to keep them alive, but no one died. And by the next morning, the power came back on, and we thought we'd never want to go through that again.
So there were a few seminal events in the history of the great state of Texas. Obviously, the Alamo before we became a nation and then a state. But the other that I think every Texan knows about, certainly those on the Gulf Coast, is the 1900 hurricane. And we were all taught about it, and many of us have read books on it. But it's still a living, breathing legacy on the island, at least from my outsider perspective. Could you say a few words about the legacy of that hurricane and what it literally means in 2025 to those BOI, but plus just the city of Galveston?
Yeah, you're right. It's something that everybody knows about and still talks about. There's historic homes that have survived the storms, and they have a plaque on the wall. We used to live in Galveston, and we lived in an older home built in 1870 or so, and it survived many storms. But the loss of life is what's incredible. They've never known how many, perhaps more than 8,000 people have died. And we knew people who had relatives who died in the storm and relatives who survived. And we've known their stories. The local newspaper, the Daily News, has put out survivor stories, and we all have a lot of interest in it. And it is something that there's a museum, a Seaport Museum, that talks about that, and a lot of the older buildings. Galveston has a tremendous number of older buildings that survived the storm, and so it's on everybody's mind, that's for sure, especially hurricane season.
Especially hurricane season.
Yeah.
The Chronicle used to put out a hurricane tracking map when I was a kid, and I used to keep that, and I would track hurricanes. So
we did all that too, yeah.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
Yeah.
What about, you touched on this when we started visiting, but this historical significance of UTMB, how it put literally generations of doctors into the state of Texas, and a few words about Old Red.
The Old Red building has the year on the building, 1891, when it's in stone, when it was built, and the cornerstone, and they built the John Seeley Hospital next to it. That's the setting of the book, really. They were the two main buildings there initially that went through the storm. But yeah, after that, the buildings survived and had damage, and it was all repaired. And they have trained many physicians for decades as the only medical school in Texas, and a very prominent one with national prestige, and just very much well known in the state.
Let me turn to another topic that maybe writers don't think enough about, and that's actually the part after you finish and you turn it in, and that's with the publisher. And I was wondering if you could say a few words about working with Lauren Steffi at Stony Creek Publishing, the Texas A&M University Press, and what was that part of your journey like to create your book?
one that would kind of compulsively rewrite. After Hurricane Harvey, a lot of us had less work to do. So my wife encouraged me to get back on the book. I didn't work on it for 15 years, just too busy. And so I kind of got back into rereading a lot of the history. And so I finished the book at that time after Hurricane Harvey in that year. And then I'm not sure what to do with it. And all my kids kind of had input. They read it, my wife, my sister. And so wasn't sure what to do with it really. And because traditional publishing is so difficult to find an agent and to publish. And I tried that route a little bit. And then I thought about self-publishing, and I thought, I really don't want to do that either. And so I've heard about Stony Creek Publishing and read the reference to it in Texas Monthly Magazine, and sent my information to Lauren and directly, and then we stayed in touch, and I sent him more chapters of the book, and then we eventually agreed that he wanted to do that, and so I was thrilled. And working with him has been great. And it takes years to get a book published. This is sort of more of a fast track, I think, working with the editor there and the publicist and him about finalizing this and getting it out there.
Lauren had a post on Facebook, I think today, but it was about a book festival in Rock Creek. And I think he said you were at that book festival, if I have all of that right.
In Rockport, yeah.
Could you say a few words about what the book festival was like for you?
That was the first event that I really had the book. The book was just released like the few days before, and I hadn't actually seen a copy of it printed. And then, so I was excited to see that, and then be able to talk to people about it. A lot of people at the festival came up to me and had questions about it. They looked at it and they said, "This sounds like a depressing story." And I said, "No, it's not depressing. It's hopeful, and it's positive, but it does include the hurricane. It's not a book about the hurricane. There's been many books about that, but it's more of one about an intern going through that and afterward." And so the festival was really enjoyable for that, being able to talk to people about it.
You really brought up something that resonated with me in a way that hadn't yet throughout this podcast, and that is the hurricane. And I don't mean to say only the 1900. What we all as Texas people who lived on the Texas Gulf Coast have been through, and we can literally name the years, and most of us the names of the hurricanes. And my wife is English, and she had never had that experience until Ike. And after that hurricane, which made it all the way to Houston, my mother called and said, "You're now a Texas girl because you've lived through a hurricane." But it's an experience that almost everyone on the Texas Gulf Coast has had, literally from Brownsville to Beaumont. And it's just burned in our memory, our consciousness, not even our memory. Any maybe thoughts about that?
I'll talk about what hurricanes we've been through. We went through Ike in 08, and you remember the year and the date, the year and the name, Alicia in 83, and then Carla, I think 61. And so, yeah, it's just part of it. Every August, we sort of July, August, get revved up we ramp up to try to get our supplies ready, evacuation routes, and keep an eye on the weather. And we used to have the old Houston Chronicles hurricane tracking map, and we waited for the coordinates. And so that was always exciting. But you're right, it's just part of life here on the coast. Yeah.
So maybe as a final question, what do you hope readers take away from Island Intern?
I think it as a historical fiction book, it's purely fiction, but I think it's based on some real life experiences. And I think to appreciate or come to know better, perhaps, the difficulty in medicine, how hard it can be at times, the challenges, but in spite of it all, how most physicians are optimistic and enjoy working with people, trying to help people. And it's not easy, but it's worthwhile. And the obstacles in the book include the hurricane. That's sort of extra pressure on the intern, but he goes through it and tries to make the best of it. And it's personal development too, as you develop as a person, to go through such things that make you better as a person and really make you as a physician, what it takes to be a physician that's actually caring for patients.
Paul, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. But before we leave, I wanted to ask you if our listeners wanted to connect with you, find out any more information about you, and certainly check out your book. What would be the best place or places for them to go?
The Stony Creek Publishing website is a very good one that lists all their publications and books, and mine is there. And so that's an easy way to take a quick look. They're local, they're in Wimberley. And also, too, they have a nice newsletter that they put out with current releases, and also Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's available. The book is available as well. And also local bookshops in the area that I'm working with in the Houston, Galveston area. If you want a hard copy quickly, it'll be available there.
Paul, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to visit with me. I hope we can continue this conversation.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I would like to.